And this administrator brought this student back into class, and it just went from they were probably a level 2 or 3,
Mhm.
and but had been at a 9 to 10. They came down on their own to a 2 or 3, and the administrator thought they were ready to go back to class, brought them back, and they went to like a 20, like, because they came right back into the trigger system. And I was so angry, and I voiced that in to the administrator. You brought them back too soon. They weren't ready. They hadn't had a time to process their pain. And this administrator looked me square in the eye. She said, maybe it's time for you to, move on from this job. Maybe you just can't handle it anymore. So made it about me.
I wish I knew how much I miss not knowing that we're all screwed.
A few years ago, I started writing a fictitious story based on my time as an educator. It is called Taught, and the story was partially inspired out of anger and frustration fueled by burnout. Okay, actually, it was more than partially inspired by anger and frustration. But Taught has also become a vehicle for me to tell what I thought at the time, and in some ways continue to think, was and is the real story of teaching. I now realize that my perspective is not everyone's perspective, but there are some pieces of Taught that resonated with many educators. This podcast is an extension of that story, and I, a former teacher, will interview other educators asking them to share how they really feel about the current state of education. Why are so many teachers burn out? Why are so many, like me, leaving the field? We likely won't solve any problems or come up with any solutions, but we can create a community of voices that maybe begin the conversation around how educators can take back teaching. I'm Melissa Lefort. Welcome to Taught, the podcast. Today I have Debbie with me. Debbie is a paraeducator. Different states and countries have this job position in their school systems, but it is called a variety of names. Paraeducators usually are hired to support students and staff in special education. However, they can also be utilized in other capacities, depending on how the job is structured in that school district, state, or country. Debbie, before we even begin, I need to tell you my thoughts on paraeducator positions, partially because this is how I started my career. In my opinion, this job is one of the most challenging in schools, and I believe the burnout rate is very high. Paraeducators frequently are expected to perform tasks that are unreasonable and not within the parameters of what they are actually hired to do. Additionally, they are not always treated with the respect that they deserve within their buildings. I say this again because I started out as a paraeducator, and I have worked in 3 different districts in 2 states, and I saw the same thing in all 3 districts. I want to thank you for coming on the podcast and being a voice for these educators. Welcome.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to visit.
So tell us a little bit about how you got into this position and kind of your history in terms of working in the education system.
Okay. I would say where it began was when being a child. I have a sibling who is a special needs adult. Well, he's an adult now, but I grew up with a special needs brother. And I just kind of always leaned into protecting him, defending him, understanding and not understanding. He's only 3 years older than me. It was tough, seeing him get teased and bullied at school. And so I think I've just my heart kind of lended into that. And then fast forward, I was a stay-at-home mom, um, lived on what my husband provided, and I didn't support financially in any way. I just raised our babies. So I'd take our youngest to his first day of kindergarten. The principal in that building knows me, and she heard my voice in the office, and she said, "Debbie, is that you?" And I said, "It is." And she said, "I need to talk to you." And so I walked into her office, and she said, "Would you like to be a para in our building?" And I had no idea what that meant. I didn't know if that was a custodian or a nurse or a super mom. I did not know. And I said, "Well, tell me more about it." there were two kiddos in my son's class, in his kindergarten class, who were identified, had IEPs, and they needed a para. And I didn't know what IEP meant. I didn't know what identified meant. I mean, I'm telling you, I was green. So I started my career with um, a little boy who one of them has passed away. He was my son's age, but he just passed away about a year ago. And then the other one was a dwarf, and his little fingers were too little to fit around even an Elmer's glue bottle because
Oh,
he was so
wow.
tiny. So that's where I started. So that's where my journey began. I served on many committees. Built a brand new elementary school, and I was asked to serve on the bond issue committee, the steering committee, the planning committee, and I toured all these different buildings with, you know, not my level of of educators, but the superintendent and city planners, all these really important people. And I thought, oh, I'm getting somewhere, but that's kind of where I've stayed, just in my lane as a para.
Well, you definitely have a pretty broad view of how the whole system works, though, from several
Mhm,
different angles, having
mhm,
served in all of these capacities. You know, when I was in school, in elementary school in the 70s, we did not have students with any sorts of special needs. And I'm assuming your brother would fall into this category. They were sent to different schools. I mean, for sure, inclusion was not a thing in the 70s.
right. Yeah.
And then that drastically changed by the time I had my own children. So when my own
Mhm,
children entered into elementary school, I definitely didn't have a background on that just as a human who had gone through the public education system.
mhm.
So when I came into Kansas, very little understanding, but it also seems like Kansas was thrown into inclusion without a good plan in
Yeah.
place for the system. And I think Kansas, I shouldn't say we because I don't live there anymore, but I feel like the special education system in Kansas, not isolated to Kansas, certainly other states have this as well, but they are still combating the side effects of being thrown into having to provide services that they did not have the infrastructure to provide.
I couldn't agree more. And it's really hard to go back and structure something where when you're literally in the middle of it and buried. I mean, it's overwhelming now. The need is so great. You can see that. I mean, that makes perfect sense to me, saying it like that and hearing it from you. Because to me, it doesn't sound like it shouldn't be this hard. Why
Yeah.
can't we get this figured out? But I know it's bigger than just managing classroom behaviors and modifying class lessons. It's the monetary level, at the state level, the federal level, with money, because things aren't cheap.
Well, one
So,
of the things that I really struggled with as a paraeducator is I did not have the knowledge base or the skill set to be doing a lot of the jobs that I was asked to do. And to
this
be quite honest with you, many of the special education teachers, so this would have been 2001, right around there, they didn't have it either. Because up
mhm,
to that point, special education had been, you've been diagnosed with a learning disability like dyslexia.
mhm,
And these are the different materials we need to use with the student. It was not, here's a student on the autism spectrum who needs a complete curriculum
mhm.
redefined for them
Right.
based on their unique needs
Yeah.
and the behaviors that are associated with them. I mean, behavior intervention plans, I don't know that very many special education teachers were having to do those before all the schools started going to complete inclusion models.
Yeah, I don't know either. Actually, I mean, I know that the trainings that I was sent to, have kind of evolved over the years. And the expectations of my role with behaviors has changed over the years. They're MANT training, MANDT, and then now it's just changed to CPI training. Both very good de-escalation models, and on a kite program, it all makes perfect sense. We went through this phase of having a time. It was called a timeout room, but
Mm-hmm.
it was literally used for a behavior that was out of control and physically put students in there and documented the time, how long they were in there, how often, check on them every minute verbally, but with the door closed. And now that room is the door is left open and propped open with bookcases because no, we don't put students in there now. We don't place students that are aggressive in there. I see things happen, think, well, I remember one that long ago. I was asked to literally physically remove a student, and sometimes it took me and 3 adult men to remove a
Yeah.
6th grader. And now we just remove all the other students and try to keep that student safe from harm, and I get that. So many things have changed, and the expectations are not always communicated. So it's hard to not sit in frustration thinking, "Now I remember this was I used to do this in this situation, so why are we still doing that?" But
Especially if they work. I went through MANT training as well. MANT was pretty good, I
yeah,
thought. Having
yeah.
said that, my first teaching job was a long-term substitute job in a life skills classroom.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
if it had not been for another teacher coming in, there was a very escalated eighth grader. He was on the autism spectrum, nonverbal, and he escalated, and he was taller than me. And I had put him in the mant hold where you go from the side and you kind of pin the arms and hold, and you're
Right.
behind them. But the thing I forgot to do was tuck my head. And it was
Oh, no.
actually that teacher that probably saved me from a broken nose, because he came in just in time to put his hand behind the student's head before the student
Mhm.
did exactly what they tell you is going to happen. Of course, I was getting paid pretty well at that point because I was a long-term sub. But the paraeducators that worked with that student were at risk of something like that happening every day.
Mhm.
So, one of the things that I saw in my time in Kansas is that the paraeducators are put in situations where their own physical well-being, actually not just in Kansas, it was in the other districts as well, their own physical well-being can very much be at stake. When even with a kindergartner, a lot of I mean, it wasn't too long ago in the news, a kindergartner who was on an IEP shot his teacher.
Mhm.
Actually, as I'm saying that, I might have been first grade, but kindergarten or first grade, tiny kid.
Mhm.
So I oftentimes feel like in the media, we hear about the things that the teachers are going through, but really, paraeducators are probably, in my opinion, at a higher risk most days if they are in a classroom where there is a student that has significant behavior issues.
Mhm.
And I guess I shouldn't say behavior issues, but if they have a significant diagnosis that leads them to exhibit behaviors that they cannot regulate, is really
Mhm.
what we're talking about, right?
Right.
What are your thoughts on that?
I agree completely. The things that I've been ex asked to do, people shake their head and think and ask me, "Why did you do that?" I didn't know not to. I was asked to do a job and I did it. We had a little guy who and I worked in life skills in a, life skills program for 20 years, and now I'm a resource
Hmm.
para, but I still work with several with probably 8 or 9 kids that have been integrated into the classroom because our life skills program has dissolved because we don't have a teacher.
Yeah.
A whole other thing. But there was this little guy who wouldn't pee unless we poured water on his penis when he was sitting on the toilet.
And I think that the public at large does not understand the risk. I'm not going to ask you how much you make per hour, but in every district that I have worked in the Pacific Northwest, we call them classified employees.
Mhm.
They made a significant amount less than every other position in the building.
Mhm.
But putting you in a position like that raises so much liability for you
Mhm.
personally because you, not just you personally, but any person in that situation, educators, administrators, we can all be sued on a personal level. All
Mhm.
it takes is one kid, one family to say, this was not appropriate. And when someone else is calling the shots for you, which is the case for paraeducators, you have many people actually calling the shots for you, saying, this is your job. This is what you need to do. This is how you
Mhm.
do it. It is a huge liability.
Yeah. Yeah, it was I actually talked to my administrator at the time. I actually asked him just one-on-one in his office one day if this was appropriate. I didn't feel comfortable. Been going on for a while, and he said, "Well, that's your job." And I said, "Well, I know I don't really have a job description because you don't know between for each student, it changes." And he said, "Well, that's what you're supposed to do." And he kind of got cross with me. So then I came back with a little cross tone, and he just said, "Don't forget who you're talking to." And so I walked out of the office and thought, well, I kind of got shot down. I was kind of silenced. But after that, we had a student come in who was diagnosed with diabetes as an eighth grader. We'd had him in sixth and seventh grade in this program. And then as an eighth grader, because they stayed with us for 3 years, his third year in the program was diagnosed with diabetes. I was asked to check his blood glucose level with the glucometer, which I didn't really mind doing. I don't believe it was really in my role because I had to also take the bloodborne pathogen test and pass it. And I know legally after that test who is supposed to administer or have anything to do with bodily fluids, and it wasn't a para. But they also told me me and another para needed to give him his insulin based on his blood glucose level. And it was dialing it up on a pen. We had a chart we read to find out how many or how many units of insulin he needed. And I did it. And you don't know this, but I'm like the biggest baby when it comes to needles. And I cried after I gave him his first dose of insulin because that was pre-pandemic. We didn't have a full-time nurse in the building. So that's what that looked like. Everybody just kind of stepped up. And then the more I thought about it, I thought I could literally find myself on the news. I do something wrong with this student and I give him the wrong amount. I'm not trained. I don't even have a CNA, much less an RN degree. I am a mom and a wife. That's my education level. And so I pushed back against it, and the classroom teacher wasn't even administering his insulin. And so I finally just said, I'm not comfortable doing this. I don't feel like it's my role. And I just said I wasn't going to do it anymore. I took a chance of maybe getting fired because I refused, and they didn't. They understood. And then they ended up finding a nurse in the district that would come 2 times a day to give him his insulin.
I do
That was
think
bad.
it is. It's ridiculous, the expectation. So
Yeah.
you just spoke to something that I think is huge, but I think there is such a feudal system in education of here's the top, here's the bottom. If you're down here, you shouldn't question anything. You should do as you're told.
Mhm.
And I think that's such I'm not going to cuss. I said I wasn't going to cuss this podcast. I think that's crap. I think it's really good that you're mentioning that because every building and I've worked in a few, I have seen paras asked to do things that are outside the parameters of what their job description is. Many, like yourself and me, I never saw a job description, had no idea. So I always felt like, well, I signed up to do this job. I guess I should have to do it.
Mhm.
That is not the way the world works anymore.
Mhm.
So if you're out there and you're a para and you're listening, the district human resources should have on file a job description. If you are being asked to do things that are not in that job description, it is legally your right to say, I'm sorry, I'm not qualified to do this. Give me the training, or you need to get somebody else.
Yeah. And legally they couldn't do anything or say anything about that, but changing diapers. I mean, that was something I did. Menstrual issues with, middle school girls who are nonverbal, aggressive, didn't have the tools to handle those things. I drew the line at, I would only help with sanitary napkins. I wouldn't do anything beyond that with a little girl. But when I started thinking about, now it's okay for me to be in this room with a closed door changing this young man's diaper, lifting him out of a wheelchair and putting him on a table and changing his diaper and then putting him back in his wheelchair and wheeling him back to class. We had male teachers in the building who, had they been asked to change a sanitary napkin on a young lady, oh, no, 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 no. That wouldn't be okay. And then I got to thinking about that. I mean, this is a long span of time before, things started kind of clicking with Debbie. And I thought, now, how come it's okay for me to do these things and it's not considered, outside the boundaries of my job description, but had it been a male teacher with a female student, the whole thing just started feeling really wonky to me. And I mean, it was good while it lasted. They had a great deal going when this was going on. They really did. I kind of started to get my cup was getting overfilled.
There are different expectations for males in the education profession than there are females. And sometimes a male can do the exact same thing, and we all, oh, you're fabulous. Oh, this guy is
Mhm.
so great. And they get these accolades. And we have females that are doing the exact same thing, but the expectation is, well, but that's your job. Hello, we all
Yeah.
got hired for the same thing. I think that male teachers probably have a higher incidence of reported misbehavior in this area than
Mhm.
female teachers do. And that works in negative ways on both sides. Certainly, female
Mhm.
teachers should be held to the same accountability standards. We should all be held to the same accountability standards. But we need to also open pathways where students feel safe with male teachers.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of work to be done on both sides of that coin.
Yeah, I agree. And I got to the point where I almost talked myself out of my feelings about some of these things because I thought, no, I don't want anybody else doing this because I love these kids. I mean, I'm famous for saying, mm-mm, this kiddo and I are not ever going to have a bond. I can't learn to love this one. Nope, it's not going to happen. And within a week, I come home and I tell my husband, "Dadgummit, wouldn't you know, they got me. Now I'm hooked." And so I would become very defensive and protective of certain students that needed extra care or had behaviors, be like, I don't want anybody else handling this. Not that
Yeah.
they wouldn't do it right, but I know I love them and I know I have a relationship with them and I don't want anybody else to. So I also kind of put some things on myself
But
inadvertently.
that's a little different, right? When we choose it and when we
Mhm,
are told that it is something that we have to do and not given. Again, this goes back to, that feudal system. I think of, that we had the landlords and then we had the serfs, and
mhm,
and it's not okay. Like I said, first of all, there's this legacy of secrecy where we don't talk about things
mhm,
because we want to put on a good face. But we also have these, and they're typically small school districts. The bigger school districts, you have less of this because you have more people and you have more people that are willing to say, I'm calling the union. And you have more
mhm,
powerful unions. And I'm not saying that I'm like a huge pro union person. I don't even know if I am or not. But I do know, much like yourself, I and every other educator, regardless of where you're at, we all deserve to be respected. And when that respect is not happening, we need to have a pathway where we can go and get help so that we can get that respect that we deserve. And I feel
mhm.
like in smaller school districts, that's a lot harder to come by. And I'm not speaking specifically to your school district, but I will say Kansas, Missouri, Iowa, Nebraska, Oklahoma, Arkansas, they are full of tiny little school districts with people a lot of times who went to school in that school district. They went off to college, came back, became administrators. They're all good buddies. And it
Mm-hmm.
becomes this good old buddy system. It
Mm-hmm.
becomes this system of people who are connected, and they make all these hidden rules,
Yeah.
and it becomes not professional anymore. And then those
Mhm.
pathways don't exist for the people working in
Yeah.
that system.
Yeah. Couldn't agree more. And that sounds, I can at the same time, well, they just started offering benefits for classified staff about 4, maybe 5 years ago, which is huge, because we couldn't afford with what we make to buy, to get our own health insurance. Um, and so, my husband always managed that for us, but that was a big deal. But when we have a staff meal coming up that our grade level is responsible for, and I'm on that certain list, that when they're on their plan period is when they discuss all of the times that, oh, well, this is what we're going to bring. This is what that'll look like. This is how much everybody needs to contribute financially. And sometimes we hear about it, but yet my name's on the same list of the, like the years broke up into quarters. And so like when it's my my group's turn to provide a staff meal, I don't have any input on, well, maybe we should do baked potato bar, but let's try soup and salads. Because we're providing for 75 people
Right.
and we make the least amount of money, but then we get told sometimes well into the game, well, we're going to do this and this and this, and this is how much everybody's going to contribute. Or we'll have to go chase down information like, hey, what did you guys decide we're going to do for such and such? Um, because they have these discussions without us, but yet they kind of talk out of both sides. Like, oh, we couldn't do it without you. You're just as much of a teacher as we are. We trust you with our kids. Can you cover the classroom while I'm out for this IEP meeting? These different, things that make us to kind of lift us up and give us hope. But then, boom, we'll let we just aren't involved with all of the ins and outs, and that probably has bothered me a lot more than I let on. Like, don't ask me to do all these things and praise me for them, and then treat me like like a para, which
Like,
and I'm the first one that'll say I don't have a degree. I didn't go to college. I don't, I don't have my own classroom. So I understand my role.
because
Treat me
we
like
are communities. Every school building, every school district, every school system is a community that should be working together for the same result, which is to give kids the building blocks they need to go on and do whatever it is they're going to do. When we do not treat people equally within that system, we set up barriers for everyone. And I think it's really important that you said that, because I think for a lot of administrators and superintendents and board office folk and teachers, they think that these little decisions that they make for, and it's not just paraeducators, right? I have seen custodial staff go through
yes.
this.
Mhm.
All of a sudden, you have a custodial staff come in for their 6 to 10 shift, and they're told, oh, and by the way, you need to set up this room for this event. They had no idea
Mhm.
that it was coming.
Right.
Um, I've seen it happen to office staff, secretaries. We have to have this presentation tomorrow. We're going to need all these 500 packets made. And
Mhm.
somebody in the office has to figure out how to do that. When we do that, what we're saying is your job is so insignificant that you can put that to the side and do this more important thing, because that's what's important to this group.
Mhm.
And it definitely creates a sense of what you said and who deserves what. We all deserve the same thing, which is
Yeah.
respect.
Yeah. I agree. And I think that's just kind of dinged on me this week, a little bit. And I don't like to be like that. But then when I get like that, I start reminding myself, okay, you know what? You get paid. So start doing that amount of work. And I
Yeah.
don't like to be like that because I'm usually one who's very task oriented. And if I see something, I can sometimes multitask and go over here. But if I see something that's like an emotion or an escalation going on, I will bail on anything and go deal with that. But I think teachers don't always think about like we had a intruder drill training at the beginning of the school year. Haven't had one in years. And I was able to point out, like we were doing a live scenario, and they came over the mic over the intercom, and that we could hear guns, like pops. And I was actually in Dan's room, because that was the hour. Because they said, okay, you're going to be in your 7th hour class. Everybody go there. Well, as paras, okay, I'm 7th hour. Okay, I'm in Dan's room. So I head down there. And he said, they get on the intercom and they said, active shooter in room 110. I said, Dan, where's that room? Because you're supposed to, if you have time to get out, go. I didn't know where room 110 was, obviously, because I don't go to that classroom. I'm not, I'm not in there.
Right.
And he said, well, I don't know. So I said, okay, this is a 200 hall. That has to be. So I said, we have time to go. Let's go. And I bailed. I mean, I acted like this was really a thing. I'm like in it. And, but then when we all got back together again, it clicked in my mind for some reason that day, just 8 months ago, 7 months ago. I told Chief Corbin, who like I'm on city council, so I know these police officers personally from city stuff, and paras. I'm always kind of reluctant to speak up because I'm a para, but we had our whole staff standing there in the commons area discussing this latest scenario, and I said, I'm gonna say something. I'm not in every classroom in this building. Room 110 teacher, I don't know who you are. I mean, I know everybody, but I said, I don't know where your classroom is when someone just says room 110. Now, if they had said Mrs. Such and Such's room, I would have known exactly where the shooter was. But I said, you have the honor or the privilege of going to your classroom with a number on the door, and that's where you stay all day. Paras are here, there, over there, sometimes escorting students, and we don't always. There was a time where you get caught with your cell phone even in your pocket. We're going to have a conversation, and I battled that, and I said, listen, you want me to transport a volatile student from point A to point B, and they get high strung someplace, I'm going to have my phone in my pocket. We went from walkie talkies that we didn't have good coverage. Anyway, I'm bunny trailing. um but this was something that really frustrated me that day, because I said, don't assume that everybody in the building knows where room 110 is. That could
I
have
think
cost
that's
lives.
good.
That cost me 20 to 30 seconds trying to figure out, look at the map. Dan didn't even know where room 110 was because he's hunkered down in his room all day. And so anyway, I just said, this is the life of a para. We're all over the place, and we know the room numbers we're assigned to and those teachers, but we walk in and out of classrooms and have to, that teacher knows those students that they have from 8 to 3. We have in middle school is 6 different classrooms. But I said, I get to learn all the teacher personalities, all of their teaching styles that I'm in their classrooms, all the students that aren't identified that might be a trigger for my identified students. Um, I get to know, the levels of need of my identified students that I'm responsible for, and the communication piece that goes back to the teacher to helpfully help me support this student. It's so much that sometimes I wish I was in a classroom all day long, just with, and kids are coming to me. and paras were coming into me, and because I come home sometimes so tired, my brain just needs to have quiet and shut off all the noise.
What are your thoughts on burnout?
Oh, it's huge right now is my biggest thought, like, according to what I just see in our district, and I believe a lot of it becomes so relevant because of there's very little morale. I've been around long enough to remember, um, staff get-togethers, um, biweekly or bi-monthly, get-togethers at a happy hour or someone's backyard. That doesn't happen anymore. Christmas parties, we didn't have a Christmas party this year that was
Wow.
sponsored or, not even sponsored, but just, like, hosted by a staff member in someone's home. Now, I believe staff get together, but they're not staff get-togethers,
Right.
um, which doesn't help the morale either. That really tanks. Uh, I believe the lack of support and communication with administration and staff, classified and certified levels. And I understand the whole confidentiality thing. I had student or my own kids went through the school system here, and I wouldn't have wanted, if my kid, my personal child had an issue. I get that. But support as far as, hey, we're going to hang on to this student in the office for a little bit longer and we'll bring them back when we feel like they're ready. And just little things like that would go a long ways with. And I of course never get any of that correspondence. If it ever
Mhm.
happens, it goes to the certified staff, and then they may or may not share that with me. And many, many times I'm in the middle or the heart of what, how that student got taken to the office or because again, like I said, I'm all over the building in a day. And so in transition time is when a lot of things happen in the hallways, in the restrooms and stuff. And so I see things and I hear things and then I report things. And then I've taught myself just to report it, walk away, not your thing anymore. And and so because I don't have time, I have got to go to another class. I have students waiting on me. So that kind of bothers me too. I think that makes me feel like, anybody could do this. You don't really need me.
Yeah.
And I've actually been told by an administrator one time when I was very upset that they brought a student back into a classroom and they clearly weren't ready. They hadn't completely de-escalated. They hadn't processed their pain. And this administrator brought this student back into class and it just went from they were probably a level 2 or 3
Mhm.
and but had been at a 9 to 10. They came down on their own to a 2 or 3, and the administrator thought they were ready to go back to class, brought them back, and they went to, like, a 20, like because they came right back into the trigger system, and I was so angry, and I voiced that in to the administrator, "You brought them back too soon. They weren't ready. They hadn't had a time to process their pain," and this administrator looked me square in the eye, and she said, "Maybe it's time for you to, move on from this job. Maybe you just can't handle it anymore." So made it about me
Wow.
instead of they put, students and staff in that volatile student in a situation they shouldn't have ever been put in. So that's like, what?
Yeah.
So I just have to I think another part of the burnout is student behavior. The pandemic certainly didn't help us out. We all knew it was all over the news. This is going to be a long lasting effect. The students have going to, you're going to notice it in the classroom for years and years. And we're
Yeah.
here. Um, Parent support is, not great. If you, and of course, I don't have any parent correspondence because I'm
Mhm.
too low on the totem pole. But I've heard tales of, well, we called home and or emailed home and this is what we got back and it wasn't very supportive. There's just a whole lot. Like educators aren't lifted and put, like, back in the Laura Ingalls Wilder's days, loved and admired, and it's kind of a laughing stock. People went into education because there's something they believed in, and every now and then you'd have a staff member in your building, they'd be like, "Oh, that one right there might have just gotten into education so they could have their summers off."
Yeah,
You know?
but there's not that many, right? That's
Mhm.
always been the surprise to me is that every building I go into, I'm like, wow, like 95% of the staff is there for legit reasons. They really
Yeah.
want what's best for these kids.
I agree. I think our staff is very strong, and, um, I just think everybody's fighting a battle. Trying to keep their head above water, trying to perform. State testing scares everybody half to death, and it's it's hard, and I do believe that that really chases some staff out. I know that I've got a lot of friends at my building who are trying to add up the days and years they have left before they can retire with full benefits, and how are they gonna make ends meet when they aren't old enough to get Medicare, and, oh, the system doesn't fit.
Or they're actively, I'm running into a lot of educators that are actively seeking to do something else.
Mhm,
And as soon as the opportunity comes, they're going to be out. And I have said, I'll probably say it 1,000 times while I'm doing these interviews, but the basis in any education system is the teachers
mhm,
and the paraeducators.
mhm,
The educators.
mhm,
If you don't have educators, you don't have an education system.
mhm.
So we need to figure out what it's going to take. Because guess what? Teachers, they can't do their jobs without the paraeducators.
Yeah. No,
Can't do it,
legally, you can't.
right?
It's against the law. It's not just, "Oh, we really need their extra hands and we really need them to walk around the classroom, check on everybody." No, it's a legal binding responsibility,
That's right.
and so figure it out. We filled out a survey not too long ago, and that was one thing that I think the state of Kansas sent it out, um, I believe. And one of my top things, they said, "What the retention rate for classified staff, what do you feel is the biggest issue?" And I said, you're fooling yourself if you think that someone is going to apply to be a para at this pay when they can go to Target or Aldi and sit at a cash register all day and make more starting out than
That's
that.
right.
Cough up some funds. I know it's there. I know there's money available somewhere. You can dig deep and find it.
Well, it's like every other school district. You can probably what do they
Yeah,
say in Kansas? I'll use a Kansas phrase, cut the fat, right?
yeah, yeah,
Let's, I grew up in Missouri, so
yeah,
kind of like Kansas, cut the fat.
yeah.
You know, what's interesting is that you have a role outside of school that is kind of helping you be an agent of change. Can you tell us
Mhm.
a little bit about this and how the two roles cross over?
Well, another thing that I fell into by accident, I was sitting at home one day about 2.5 years ago, and my best friend called and said, "Hey, the mayor's getting ready to call you. She wants to see if you want to be serve on city council." I go, "What?" I again knew nothing about that any more than I knew about being a para, 26 years ago. So sure enough, here comes this phone call from the mayor to my phone, and she presented this to me with a city council member from my ward was moving, and they needed to replace his position because he had like 6 months left on his term. I said, "I- who you don't get to tell the mayor no,
Yeah.
for one thing." And I took it on, and then I ran again, and against myself pretty much. And so I got that term. And I just turned in my information. I'm going to run again. So city council ward 2 in my community, and it's been really fun. I'm learning a lot, and it's kind of given me something of my own outside of school.
Yeah.
It's just mine. And um, my biggest accomplishment so far that ties the two together was actually from Dan's classroom. He had a project, and we were watching this video, and there's this stretch of highway that goes through our town that we don't have a sign in our community. We didn't know anything about this. And he just presented it to the class and said to every student in seventh grade that had his class, I think there was, I don't know, 80, 90 kids that went through that year. And maybe he'll listen to this and go, "What were you talking about?" But anyway, there was this one student who kind of jumped on it and said, asked me privately, "Hey, I think I'd like to tackle that. What will that look like?" And so I kind of spearheaded a meeting with the city council and city staff, and she came and we presented it to city staff one night at a formal meeting, and currently have a Jefferson Highway sign proudly presented in our community, and it's really cool. There's another project that we're looking for student involvement with here coming up, and I don't want to say too much, but it will be really significant, and I get to be a part of that because it kind of again started in Dan's classroom. So I brought it to the meeting the other night and they said, "That's awesome. Let's go with it." So we'll
You know,
see.
Debbie, this is our first time meeting, and I'm in Portugal and you are in Kansas, but you seem to me to be someone who has a heart for your community.
Mhm.
It seems like you had it back when you were advocating for your brother. You wanted your community to advocate for your brother. And when your kids were in school, you wanted to advocate for them and all of their peers. And you've continued that work, and now you're doing it for the community in a much broader sense.
Well, I do. I mean, I love where we live, and that's a great place to raise a family. And there's literally, I could walk out the door any day of the week from my job, but when the days get long, I'm like, I don't have to do this. I mean, I don't make enough money really for it to even be missed. It's embarrassing. Um, but I couldn't walk away because I think there's too much still I want to do and accomplish. And every year it's something different, with being a para. There's always a new task that I want to tackle and perfect.
I think your school and your community is lucky to have you. Okay, so it is time for us to have our three for the road because I know you have some obligations this afternoon here shortly. So I don't want to, I could keep you on here all day, to be
That
honest.
would
Um,
be fun.
okay, so I like to end each week by asking three things and then one surprise question. Okay, so number one, what is the one thing you would change immediately in education if you could? It's a magic wand, anything you want, go.
Oh my goodness, change in education. I think some more life applicable teaching. Things when they walk out of the classroom, they can apply it when they get home. That day, next week, they can remember, "Oh, wait, this would be a great time to do that." I think what they learn in school right now, a lot of times is great for testing models, but I don't know if what we learn or teach in school is always going to help them in life. Money, time, um, math skills that are life applicable math skills, not necessarily geometry. I think if you want to go into that field as an engineer in your career, great. Take all those classes at an upper level. Um, I think we do our kids a disservice by not teaching them more, uh, not just life skills like for special ed kiddos. I think all kiddos need to know how to meal plan, shop the sales, figure a percent. How much is 25% off of $29 gonna be? Is that worth me going 2 more miles down the road with gas prices at this for that 25% off? Or just little things like that. I think we just really haven't helped kids in our nation with
Those
that.
real world connections are super duper important. I
I agree.
agree.
I agree.
Because of the nature of what we do, unfortunately, we oftentimes witness tragedy.
Mhm.
Can you tell me about one of the most tragic things you have witnessed or a trauma that you have endured because of something you've witnessed as an educator? And it is to your comfort level, whatever you would like to talk about.
Um, well, earlier I mentioned that one of the two students that I started my career with when he was in kindergarten has now passed away. He was my son's age in my son's classroom. So I tried really hard to remember. He was the latest student that I've lost to death. But there have been four other students that over the years have passed away, health related or not. And then a wonderful, wonderful sped teacher who I had the privilege of working side by side with was killed in a car accident, head on collision, June 21st, 4 years ago. And it was, it devastated. And then that very next November, we lost a student to in a car accident. Him and his dad were both killed instantly in a car accident on kind of an icy morning. And that was one of the days where, you hear about we brought in extra counselors to help students cope. It was life altering. So those are the heartbreaks. They leave your classroom and you have them for years, or you teach beside them and then they're gone. And our kids were cheated out of the best sped teacher I've ever worked beside in my entire life. And he's sorely missed. Um, so those are the griefs.
Yeah.
You can't, you learn from them and you grow from them, but you just see the tears from the students in the hallways because their friend that they've protected and loved is not there anymore. And, so that's hard.
We become part of an extended family by being educators.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Okay, to kind of balance things out, kids are super funny too. What's one of the funniest things you've experienced during your time as an educator?
Oh, I had to think really hard about this. There's probably two, and it's funny because they're both from the same student, and he's 23, I believe now. But one time we were on our way. Um, we had gone on a field trip, and he was in our life skills program, and I was driving the van that he was in. We always took smaller vehicles, and kind of just drove in a caravan, and I said, everybody kind of got out of the um, vehicle, and he was just standing there. And I had gotten my arms loaded, and I was like, "Come on, let's go." I had closed the door, the sliding door on the van, and I said, "Come on, we got to go." And he just looked at me, and his hand, legitimately, it was like stuck in the van door, and I had closed the door on his hand,
Oh my gosh.
and I said, "Oh my gosh." But autistic, very high functioning autistic, but his words weren't coming out. And I go, "Ah!" And so I had to open the door really fast, and his little finger was just, had a gigantic, it didn't break anything, thank
Oh,
God, because it was funny after everything was figured out. And that's the first day I ever saw a tear come out of his eye.
oh,
Oh, it broke my heart. But at the
oh.
same time, it was funny because it's such a true example of autism.
Yes.
They don't always have the words, they don't have emotion. It's just a blank slate all the time, very monotone person. And then that same kiddo, it might have been that year, we had him sick or for 3 years. His dog passed away that week, and he was telling me about it. He and I were very, very close. And he was telling me about it, and still no emotion, just this is part of my day, very monotone. And I said, "I'm so sorry that happened." Well, so the classroom teacher overheard this conversation, and she said, "What's going on?" And I said, "Well, his dog passed away the other day." And she said, "Oh, I'm so sorry. Were you close to him?" And he looked at her and he said, "No, he was at the vet." And I thought, "Oh, it's just those times are so rewarding because it's so, if you don't, and of course, he took everything so literal. I
Yes.
wasn't close to him. We took him to the vet. I wasn't right there. Gross. So anyway, those were my two funnies. There's so many.
Okay, so I promised you a bonus question.
All right.
Prepare yourself. You go into the staff room. As a paraeducator, you might actually go into different ones because in middle schools they have them in different areas. But you go into the staff room, you need to get some water in your cup, and the sink is full of dirty dishes. Whose responsibility is it to clean those dishes?
The people that put them there.
What if they
Um,
don't?
um, well, I used to do that. Honestly, I used to wipe down the counters and get the crumbs off the table so that it would be nice. I don't do that anymore. I don't do that anymore. I've come a long ways. They
There's
can sit there.
always
I
gonna
watch.
there's always gonna be dishes in the sink, and there's always gonna be crumbs, right? That someone's gonna
Yeah,
leave for you to clean up.
yeah, always. And I kind of get, sometimes I fall back into that and I don't know why, but less and less all the time. I'm kind of, I don't have to prove myself anymore. And it
I
feels
love
really
that.
good. I think they know what they've gotten me, and I think I've stood the test of time. And I have a whole lot of other things I could be doing with my time, and I still choose to go there every day. So I'm not gonna, I'm not cleaning up dishes in the break room anymore.
I hope they do know what they have in you, especially when they hear this. So, is there anything else that you'd like to share before we say goodbye today?
I don't think so. I just continue to lift up in your thoughts and your energy and your prayers, whatever. Educators as a whole, we're struggling trying to, stay happy and keep a smile on our face when there's a lot of adversity coming at us. And my fellow paras out there, whoever hears this, hang in there. You know, obviously we don't do this for the money. I don't know a para that says, "Man, I couldn't do anything else because this money is so wonderful. I can't walk away from this." There's not a para out there that's going to say that. So obviously, I think classified staff members are in it for different reasons, and that's a special person. That's a special heart. So hang in there. Take a mental health day now and then, and you don't have to excuse it or explain it. And also another thing I've learned in the last 5 years is no is a complete sentence, and it doesn't have to have an explanation or a reason behind it. Can you do this? No.
That is great advice, Debbie. Thank you so much for coming on.
Well, thanks for having me. This is a great way to start my weekend.
I'm glad you think so.
I
I wish I knew.
The word is out. Educators' voices matter, and you're proving it. In just 3 weeks, Taught, the podcast, has reached over 100 downloads. Now, let's build a community together. Have you listened to an episode and wished you could join the conversation? My goal is for these stories to spark action, to help us all find ways to improve the education system we care so deeply about. Now, your voice can be a part of this change. Find Taught the Podcast on Instagram at Taught the Podcast, Facebook at Taught by a Teacher, website taught.buzzsprout.com, and our YouTube channel Taught at Taught 2022. Your support in any form makes a difference. Like, subscribe, or follow us on these platforms. If you're able, consider becoming a supporter at the website taught.buzzsprout.com or purchase the book Taught by a Teacher on Amazon.com. All links are in today's show notes. Before I sign off, I want to say, if you liked today's episode, and since you're still with me, I'll assume you did, be sure to check out my 3-part series featuring Kelly on special education teacher burnout. Today's episode was produced and edited by me. The theme music is by Otis McDonald featuring Joni Inez. If you know someone who might enjoy these conversations, please share the podcast episodes as much and as often as you can. It's as simple as copying the link you use to access today's episode and sending it in a message or sharing it on social media. I'm a small, independent operation, and your shares broaden our audience. Perhaps you or someone you know will be inspired to talk about teacher burnout. If you would like to get your voice on my podcast, contact me via the link on my webpage, tot.buzzsprout.com. Coach, speaker, and author Rashid Ogunlaru said, "It may take many voices for people to hear the same message." Join me in being one of the many voices rising up to get the message out around educator burnout. This is Melissa Lefort. Thank you for listening to Tot, the podcast.